10 years ago, when I was a high school senior, my mother and I went to Maine to tour Bowdoin College. At the admissions office, we were introduced to a young man by the name of DeRay. I'll never forget how, as he walked between pine trees and ivy-covered brick buildings, not unlike our own, he continued the refrain, "Welcome to Bowdoin, welcome to Brunswick, welcome to Maine." It was his own personal spin on the tour guide script, but it truly made us feel welcomed. When I look back on Bowdoin now, I still consider it home. And part of the reason for that is because I truly grew up there. And that tour guide, who I'm sure has long forgotten that day, became an even bigger part of that. At the first orientation meeting of my freshman year, that familiar face from my visit came through the door to address my group of nervous first years. He recited Bowdoin's offer of the college, which is the more poetic version of Taft's Portrait of the Graduate. To make hosts of friends who are to be leaders in all walks of life, to lose yourself in generous enthusiasms and cooperate with others for common ends. This is the offer of the college for the best 4 years of your life. To make hosts of friends who are to be leaders in all walks of life. Little did I know then, but I was in the presence of a man who would, a decade later, become his generation, our generation's leading voice for social justice and democratic change. After college, DeRay Mckesson joined Teach for America as a math teacher in Minnesota, where he served underprivileged youth both in and out of the classroom. In 2013, in the wake of the tragic death of Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, DeRay packed up his apartment, left his stable life behind, and moved to Missouri with little in tow beyond an iPhone and his now famous blue vest. His article, titled "My Blackness is Not a Weapon," went viral and introduced him to a national audience. Over the past 2 years, DeRay has grown from a blogger who recorded events to an agent of change, a man who made events happen through empathy and dignity. Martin Luther had the printing press, Martin Luther King Jr. had a microphone, DeRay Mckesson has an iPhone. He is recognized as one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement and is a leader of Campaign Zero, which aims to end police violence. In this capacity, he recently met with Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, senior advisor to President Obama, Valerie Jarrett, and recently received an invitation to meet with presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. He was profiled in a New York Times Magazine cover article titled, "Our demand is simple, stop killing us." He's been profiled by Rolling Stone magazine and made appearances on Fox News, MSNBC, and The Nightly Show with Larry Wilmore. He gained even wider visibility for his debate with Wolf Blitzer on his show. Fortune magazine ranked him number 11 on its list of the 50 greatest leaders in the world, the 11th greatest leader in the world, which put him 7 spots ahead of Bill Gates and 14 spots ahead of Mark Zuckerberg. In short, it is a huge deal and an incredible honor that he's joining us this morning. Have any doubt that DeRay is a big deal? Consider this. Beyonce follows him on Twitter. In 2015, 754 people have been killed by the police. 750,000 black men are in prison. We have a race problem in our country, and if the current state of American politics on both sides of the aisle is any indication, it will be on us to solve it. John F. Kennedy demanded that we each ask what we can do for our country, but before we do that, we must first define what our country means. DeRay is here to challenge your notions of privilege, equality, and democracy. If you accept JFK's challenge and ask what you can do to make America better, the first answer is to listen. Please join me in offering our warmest welcome to our morning meeting speaker, DeRay Mckesson.
I really appreciate that, Corbell. We overlapped at Bowdoin. I loved Bowdoin. Bowdoin was an incredible place, and I was your tour guide. So I'm happy that you love the college, and it's good to see you again. I haven't seen you in so long. It's great to be here and really humbling. I think about those early nights, or those late nights, those early days in Ferguson last year, when we had begun the protests. because Mike Brown was killed on August 9th, and I never thought that we'd be here a year later. I never thought that we would be at a place where the protests had spread across the country and people had understood that the violence of the police was something that we did not have to endure in this America. When I think about my own story, Mike got killed on August 9th, and August 16th, I was on my couch in Minneapolis. I saw it on Twitter, and I was like, something looks wrong, I want to go. So I got in a car, drove 9 hours, ended up in St. Louis, put on Facebook, I'm going to St. Louis, and then 7 hours later, a friend of a friend was like, we found somewhere for you to sleep, and that was how I ended up as someone who was down there. Like Mike said, or Mr. Corbell, to you, I originally went to bear witness. Like, it was a Saturday, I need to go back to work on Monday. I was like, let me go and see if this is really as wild as what I'm seeing on TV. And I got down there, it was the second night that I was there, it was the first night of the curfew. If you remember, Governor Nixon put a curfew in, we all had to be in by midnight. And at 8 o'clock, someone threw a water bottle at the police, and the police went off. And they sort of, it was every weapon that you could imagine. So it was a tear gas, it was pepper spray, it was LRAD or MRAP, which are like the sound cannons, it was smoke bombs. And in that moment, I became a protester. I was like, I will never forget what it was like to be tear gassed on an American street because we were saying that the police shouldn't kill people. I also remember, I went to Bowdoin, so I'm like, I think I'm pretty smart. And I remember the tear gas canister. So tear gas comes out of a gun that makes a loud pop, and it's like a canister that the smoke comes out of. And I remember seeing them shoot it, and I was like, DeRay, just follow the smoke, right? If you follow the smoke, don't go where the smoke's going, you'll be cool. And I was standing still. Next to me was it was a gate. Behind me were cars because the police had not cleared out the street yet. And in front of me, I could sort of go, but in front of me was the police, so I wasn't gonna run that way. And so tear gas, they shoot the tear gas, and I'm like, follow the smoke. So I'm like, I'm good. And unbeknownst to me at the time, the tear gas, the smoke and the canisters go in two completely different directions, which I learned that day. And like out of a TV show, there was like a canister at my left foot and a canister at my right foot. And I will never forget that moment because I remember being like, what am I gonna do? I can't run to my right or my left. There's a gate, can't go behind me because there are cars. And I like put my face in my t-shirt and I just like ducked and I like ran through the smoke. And I'll never forget opening my eyes because tear gas can make your contacts sear to your eyes, and I wear contacts. And I remember opening my eyes and being able to see, and I was like, thank you, God. But that was one of the wildest moments that I've ever experienced. And in that moment, I became a protester. There have been protests across the country for the past year. The police have killed about 900 people this year in all states but 3, and every day but 9 days. And that is something that we just don't think has to be that way. There's this misconception that the protesters are anti-police. We're not anti-police. I believe that there will always need to be a body of people who help make sure that there's not property damage or damage to people, that people aren't hurt. What I do believe is that the police don't have to kill people. That when we think about so much of what's happening is that there's a police first response to everything. That anything that happens in communities, especially Black communities, that the police should be the first responders. And I just don't think that's true. I think about one of the men who was killed this year. He had a screwdriver. He was standing in the doorway. His mother called the police and said, can you help bring my son to psychiatric care? The police showed up. He's in the doorway with a screwdriver. They say it's a deadly weapon. They shoot him in front of his mother, and she watches her son die. And it just doesn't have to be that way. Or Tamir Rice, who was a kid, he was in Cleveland. He had a toy gun. Somebody called the police. The police officers drive on the grass. They get to Tamir. He sort of puts his hands up because the police roll up on him. They think that he's aiming the gun. They say that they think he's aiming the gun at him, and they shoot Tamir dead. And he's 12, that just doesn't have to be the world that we live in. So much of this for us is about exposing that and saying there is another way that we can do this work around safety, and also challenging people to think about safety differently. That safety does not mean that the police always need to be there. If you think about the most affluent parts of this community, or even this community itself, this space is safe not because the police are everywhere. The police are not all over Taft, and it's a safe space. And what makes this place safe is that it's resourced differently, that people have come together around the values of what it means to be in a space like this. And we can actually do that in communities across the country. We also believe that this is really race-based, right? That like when we think about what's happening in affluent, when we think about what's happening in low-income communities or whatever sort of code word you will use for black, that they are just policed differently. I was in a class this morning and I told them about, way before August, I got pulled over in a neighborhood in Baltimore. I was wearing like a Bowdoin hoodie, some hoop shorts, and flip-flops. I like needed to get to this school that I was working at. I was probably speeding, and this officer was behind me, and I thought I was gonna get a ticket, so I was like, let me just pull over myself, right? I'm gonna pull over, you give me the ticket, because I need to get to school real quick. It's like 6 o'clock in the morning, and he approaches my window with his gun drawn, and he's like saying every curse word that he can imagine, and I'm like, calm down, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And he's like, like with his gun out though. And eventually I don't get a ticket, I don't get a warning. He pulls up next to me as we drive away and he's like, oh, it's your birthday soon. And I'm like, we are not friends, right? That's not how this goes. You just had your gun in my face. We are not friends. But again, it's like, what made you like take your gun out in my presence? And I'm like I'm maybe 150 pounds soaking wet. Like I'm wearing a Bowdoin hoodie. What am I going to do at 6 o'clock in the morning? But again, like race is functioning. What does it mean that black bodies like mean something different in terms of how people think about them as threats? And that's what we are getting to. Somebody in the class also sort of pressed to me about this issue of sort of rioting and peaceful police or MLK. And, one of the things I reminded the class is that, it was King who said a riot is a language of the unheard, right? What does it mean? We have never been voiceless. We have always been unheard. There are so many people who feel like the traditional ways of sort of bringing about change have never worked for them. People don't wake up and say, I want to be poor. I want to live in whatever your conception of the ghetto is. I want to be in the projects. Nobody wakes up and says that. There are like institutions and systems in this America that have forced people into poverty and have forced people into these situations that like they seemingly have no way out of. And the movement has been about like exposing that for people, and then B, helping people think about how to get out of it. So I think about those early days in St. Louis. It was us saying that we made two commitments. We said we will stand today and we will come tomorrow. And we made those commitments over and over. You think about August, it was illegal to stand still in August. So if you saw us like marching up and down the street, it wasn't because we thought marching was like this really incredible thing to do. It was because it was called the 5-second rule. You could only stand still for 5 seconds. It was illegal. So anybody who stood still got arrested, including the press. I mean, it was like this incredibly wild place to be in America. And that is what people sometimes forget, that it was not as if we came out trying to fight the police. People came out because Mike Brown's body lay in the street for 4.5 hours, and there were kids who saw Mike die. Like it was in a really tight community that they saw Mike die. And people came out to mourn his death. It was a vigil. People just came outside. And the police came outside with their dogs in response to the vigil. And they wanted people to go home. And people were like, no, like you won't bully me into going home. And it was that sort of cycle that led to the protest. It was not people coming out and being like, we just want to fight the police. And again, in St. Louis, the police have killed 9 people since August. So it's not like this distant past. It is like very recent for people. You think about Kajim Powell, you think about Von Derrick, all of these cases where we were lied to by the police. And again, I'm not anti-police, but I do know that like Darren Wilson's police report was blank. Like he literally turned in a police report with the date on it. That is the only thing on the official police report. Or Von Derrick Myers, who got killed in St. Louis, he was the 3rd person to get killed by the police since the protest started. The original story was that Von Derrick jumped out of a bush and attacked the police officer with a gun. And you're like, what black person in America is jumping out of a bush trying to attack the police? Like that is just not, like just from jump, we were like, that doesn't make sense. And then the story changed and it was like, there is no bush. He was running. And you're like, okay, well, what happened to the bush? And then the police story was that he sort of pulled out a gun from his waistband and you're like, well, where's the gun? And then we get the gun residue report back. And the only conclusive thing that the state can say is that Von Derrick was in the presence of a gun. And you're like, well, no stuff. He got shot to death, right? Of course he was in the presence of a gun. Like, I actually don't know anything more about his death than I did before. And even in that case, what came out very recently is that the other officer who was with him actually just got found guilty of lying in another case. Or you think about Tamir Rice. Tamir Rice was 12 years old. He got killed in Cleveland. He had a toy gun. and I don't know if you've seen the video of Tamir Rice being killed, but his sister, it's across the street from this apartment complex. His sister, somebody knocks on the door and says, they just killed your brother. So, and somebody has their cell phone recording of it. She runs to his body, like she is just like sprinting to his body. And these officers, like they literally clothesline her and they like take her down. And then they put her in the cop car next to his body. So she just like sits there next to his body. And Tamir's not dead yet. So when you look at it on the camera, Tamir Rice got shot. He didn't die for another 16 hours. And like no officer administered any first aid. Like literally it's like 20 officers, they just like watched Tamir die. His sister is in the car watching. And then the most heartbreaking part is his mother comes down. Somebody finally gets to his mother. And his mother comes down and they say to her, you have two choices. You either go with Tamir's body in the ambulance or you wait with your daughter. And she's like, I guess I'll go with Tamir. While her daughter like sits in the back of the cop car next to where Tamir's body was. And she like travels with him to the hospital. And again, at that point, everybody thought Tamir was dead, but he was not. Like he was, he was alive. And what we believe is that if he had gotten any type of first aid in that first hour, Tamir might have lived, but he didn't. And there's so many of those stories. Another is Aiyana Jones. She was like 11. She was sitting on the couch in her grandmother's house. There was a no-knock raid, and a no-knock raid is when the police like have a warrant. They don't have to knock because there might be something dangerous inside, and they can just go in and take whatever they need, or go find whoever they want. The police with Aiyana Jones, they just knocked on the wrong door. So it was like a duplex. It was like a door here, and like this apartment is on the first floor. This door goes up to the second floor. They were supposed to knock on this door, but instead they knocked on this door. So they knocked the door down. Aiyana is asleep in her grandmother's lap. They're on the couch right there when you open the door. Aiyana, the police knocked the door down. So she like perks up. They say that they think it's a gun. They shoot Aiyana dead in her grandmother's lap. Her grandmother's holding her as she dies. And she's just gone. And the police are like, I'm sorry. And that is it. And again, we believe that like, that just isn't the way that we should police people in America, that is not it, and that we can do something about that. And those are the stories that we lift up because those are the truth. And Freddie Gray in Baltimore, when people saw, somebody in class pressed me about what was happening in Baltimore around sort of looting or property damage. And again, what I remind people is that the police have been violent since August. We have not killed 900 people. We have not, done any of those things to people. And property damage for so many people is what happens when they feel like they have no other option, that they cannot call anybody, that voting doesn't matter, but they know that if they do something to property, people will listen. And I don't have to condone it to understand it. I get it. I have not participated in those things, but I've been there. And again, it is people who feel like they have no other recourse. And that is as American as America is. So if you are frustrated by what is happening and what happened in Baltimore or St. Louis, then you have to challenge yourself to also be frustrated by what happened in the Revolutionary War, what happened at the Boston Tea Party, what happened at Shays Rebellion, right? That all of these things have had attacks on property as a key part of them. So I'd push you to think about, if you are so frustrated by what happened when people burned down the QT or sort of broke into stores, that means that you are also frustrated by this larger legacy of property damage and American resistance. The last thing that I'll offer as I close is some thoughts about what it means to talk about race. In this past year, there's been so much space that has opened up for us to have these tough conversations about race that are necessary. And some of you don't come from backgrounds where you were either in proximity to non-white people or in proximity to poverty or disadvantage. And if that is the case, the question for you is how do you put yourself in spaces or expose yourself to experiences that are not your own? And a key part of that will be you asking those questions and having those tough conversations with people that allow you to learn more. And what does it mean to be in a place like this? It has such a deep history, and you have access to so many resources. And how can you put yourself in places where you read different things, or you watch different movies, or you put yourself in space where you are exposed to new ideas, whether it is Toni Morrison or Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book, or TV shows where you can just critically examine the way race functions. In class we were talking about what does it mean that Band-Aids are skin tone, and it is not a skin tone that looks like anything on my body, right? What does it mean that it is a fairly new phenomenon that there are non-white baby dolls, right? That is new. That is like a new thing that like the way that we have thought about toys for so long have been white, that like film, for instance, was designed to like to maximize exposure to white skin. That is, and you know, we're not making these things up, that is like how we have structured so much of this society, by privileging whiteness. And what does that mean? And how can we talk about that? And what does it mean to unpack those things? That is a part of this work, and you are uniquely situated at a place like Taft to explore these questions in as deep as a way as possible. I think about Twitter a lot. You know, I went from 800 followers in August. I have about 200,000 now. I get about 100 million impressions or interactions with my tweets every month. And, you know, Beyonce does follow me, and I think Beyonce is great. It's funny, when Beyonce followed me, I did not immediately follow her back, and the Beehive lost it. They were like, who do you think you are? Beyonce follows you. I can't believe you don't follow Beyonce back. But I do follow Beyonce back now. And Twitter, you know, the very last thing I'll say is this idea that Twitter and the classroom are the last two radical spaces in America. Twitter has been interesting because it allows us to talk to people that we never would have talked to before. It allowed us to push back on dominant culture narratives in a way that we couldn't before. So when the police in Baltimore shot a smoke bomb, and a smoke bomb literally is that, it like makes a loud bang, smoke is everywhere. It doesn't make you, I mean, it's just smoke. So you sort of choke because it's smoke, but it doesn't burn or anything. They shot a smoke bomb. It sets a trash can on fire, and the police are tweeting. They're like live tweeting. The protesters just set a trash can on fire. And it was awesome because in real time, a reporter wrote back to the Baltimore police and was like, actually, I just saw you shoot that smoke bomb and set the trash can on fire. And like, Twitter, if it wasn't for Twitter, you know, we wouldn't have been able to do that. Like, that was really powerful. In Missouri, they literally would have convinced you that we didn't exist if it was not for Twitter. So I remember the night that I like had to hide under my steering wheel because the SWAT cars were driving down residential neighborhoods with their flashlights in our cars trying to find people. And I could tweet about it, and I could find other people in that same neighborhood who were like hiding in people's backyards or laying under trees and all this stuff so that the SWAT cars didn't find us. And Twitter has also opened up space. You know, I think about some fun stories around John Green, who wrote The Fault in Our Stars, if any of you have read that, or Looking for Alaska, or Paper Towns. You know, I tweeted the other day, I want to read Paper Towns. I've heard it's one of John Green's best. And I didn't like at John Green. I didn't put his Twitter name in it. Like 20 minutes later, he tweets me, and he's like, DeRay, you know, I think The Fault in Our Stars is actually my best book, but who am I? It's like, okay, John. And then I write back to him because he's somebody who's in love with last words, the famous last words of people. And I say, John, are there any last words that speak to you in this moment? And he says, it is rumored that Harriet Tubman's last words were "Swing low, sweet chariot." And we had this like great talk, or I tweeted, and I told the class this story this morning, but I tweeted, I want to reread The Giver. I love The Giver. The Giver was like a magical text to me when I was in middle school. And somebody called Lois Lowry like inscribed 3 books to me and like overnighted them. And I was like, okay. And that sort of stuff is really interesting in the sense that it has like opened up an opportunity to talk to people that we never would have had a chance to. I think about the classroom as that too. When I think about Twitter and the classroom being the last 2 radical spaces in America, that the classroom is one of the last spaces where you like get to fight about ideas, where the idea still matters, where the way you think about the world becomes the way you live in the world, and like classrooms make that magic happen. So I'd say make this place like show up for you. Make this place be a place that exposes you to a range of different conversations and options. I'll be around later to answer any sort of specific questions you have about the movement. Again, I'm humbled to be here. Thank you, Mike, or Mr. Corbell, and thank you for the invitation.